Good morning, everyone. Welcome you all to the ICAS 2017 Annual Conference on China-US Relations. My name is Nong Hong. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for US-China Studies. On behalf of the organizing committee, we'd like to welcome you all to be with us today. We are about to launch a discussion on China-US relations and looking back at the challenge that we face today and also the prospects in eliminating the future cooperations. Before we start, I would like to thank our co-organizer of this conference and the National Institute for South China Sea Studies and the China Institute at the University of Alberta and the China Center for Collaborative Studies on the South China Sea at Nanjing University. So very delighted to have the leadership of ICAS partner institution with us today, Dr. Wu Shichun and Professor Zhu Feng and Professor Gordon Holden. Before we start, I'd like to invite Dr. Wu Shichun, the President of National Institute for South China Sea Studies, who is also served as the Chairman of Advisory Board at ICAS, to give us a welcome remark. Please welcome me to Dr. Wu Shichun to the podium.
Respectful Ambassador Cui Tiankai, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning. On behalf of the organizers, as Dr. Hong just mentioned, I don't need to repeat it. I would like to say a few words to kick off this important event. Thank you all for coming and join us to attend this important and timely event, where we're going to look at the topic of China-US relationship, one of the most important bilateral relationship in the world. To my understanding, a sound China-US relationship is significant for our two countries and their peoples, and it is also a common wish for the entire international community. The harmony and the stability of these important bilateral relations rely on efforts of our two governments and the wisdom of the statesmen. There is no doubt that think tanks of our both countries are also playing a key role in helping shape and enhance China-US relations. As the first independent Chinese think tank based in Washington, D.C., the Institute for Sino-American Studies, ICAS for short, is in a unique position to facilitate dialogue and understanding between our two countries. In research and analysis on important issues, such as the South China Sea issue, Belt and Road initiatives, Korean Peninsula, trade and economic relations, ICAS is able to deliver Chinese policy perspectives to Washington audience and the community of the think tanks in particular, and provide China with the behind-the-scenes view of what drives American foreign policy initiatives towards China. The fundamental goal of ICAS is through independent research and analysis to offer objective view on many issues relating to China-US relations to avoid misjudgment and miscalculation in policy making. However, there is always more work to do, and this conference represents an important part of furthering the ICAS mission. So in last 2 years, since the ICAS was established, if my remember is right, ICAS was set up here in Washington, D.C. in April 2015, when we organized academic conference on China-US security cooperation. as an inauguration event. So since then, we have received welcome, supports, and advices from our American friends and colleagues, many of whom are here present here today. So by taking this opportunity, I would like to express my sincere thanks to you all, the participants of this event. Well, as a co-organizer of this conference, I wish this conference a great success, and I hope this event will play a positive role in shaping the long-term future China-US relationship. Finally, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Ambassador Cui Tiankai for gracing us with his presence. Having the Chinese ambassador to the United States here today is an important asset to this discussion. And I greatly appreciate that you are taking time out of your busy schedule to address this important topic. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellency Mr. Cui Tiankai, Ambassador China.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wu Sichun, for your very kind words of introduction. And good morning, everybody. Let me also thank the Institute for China-America Studies for inviting me this morning to join your discussion on the prospects and challenges for China-US relations. I'm sure all of us will benefit from the conference today. And I hope to share my views with you and to get inspired by your visionary comments later on in the day. The relationship between China and the United States is a strategic one. And in order to understand this relationship, we need to know the path we have traveled, but more importantly, steer the direction we are heading to. We need to discuss the issues, but more importantly, understand the whole picture. And also in the hot July, some 46 years ago, an American named Henry Kissinger made his legendary visit to China. It marked the beginning of the visionary efforts of the leaders of China and the United States to break the ice between our two countries and start a new relationship. In the almost half century since then, this relationship has withstood the test of the Cold War, survived the ups and downs afterwards, and made historic progress. It is now facing new circumstances of the 21st century with unprecedented opportunities and challenges. Looking into the future of China-US relations, we have to give answers to some important questions. What kind of a relationship that we should build together in the interests of both countries as well as of the world? Will conflict and confrontation be unavoidable between China and the United States? Is the so-called Thucydides trap so insurmountable that China and the US are destined for war? Can China and the United States blaze a trail in international relations in which all countries, especially the major ones, engage in win-win partnership instead of zero-sum rivalry? This is a historic challenge to both our countries. It is a test on our understanding of the new realities of today's world. It is a test on our ability to grasp the major trends of the 21st century in the economy and in politics, in science and in technology, and in society and in culture. It is also a test on our determination and courage to take the lead and pioneer the transformations. This is a historic opportunity for both our countries. If we make the right choice now, we shall both have an opportunity to win a stable and supportive international environment while addressing pressing domestic agenda. We shall also have the opportunity to build a more solid foundation for future China-US relations and for a better world order that will benefit all nations. And this is also our shared responsibility. It is our responsibility to our people. The Chinese people and the American people both have great aspiration. When China and the United States work together, both the Chinese dream and the American dream will have a much better chance to come true. It is our responsibility to future generations. We owe it to our children and their children that they can look forward to a better life, greater happiness, and a brighter future. It is also our responsibility to the global community. China and the United States are the two largest economies in the world, and both are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And we owe it to the world to join hands in safeguarding world peace, promoting global prosperity, protecting world environment, and maintaining and reforming the world order. Therefore, the choice before us is clear, and there is actually no alternative. China and the United States have to work together to build a strong and stable relationship that is based on the principles of non-conflict, non-confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation. We should not fight another Cold War, still less a hot war. Nor should we be content with cold peace. And the best way of overcoming a trap is to open up a new path. Our historical mission is not the transfer of global dominance from one power to another, by war or by less confrontational means. Rather, our mission is to establish a new model of international relations that are based on common interest and shared future. And since President Trump took office, China-US relations have made important and positive progress, thanks to the concerted efforts of the two sides. Our two presidents have set a constructive tone and pointed the way forward for China-US relations with their successful meetings in Mar-a-Lago in April and in Hamburg, Germany, during the G20 summit early this month. The two sides have also established 4 high-level dialogue mechanisms covering diplomatic and security issues, economic relations, cultural and people-to-people exchanges, and law enforcement and cybersecurity. The first round of the diplomatic and security dialogue held last month was very successful, and so was the Comprehensive Economic Dialogue, CED, last week. At the CED, the two sides had an in-depth exchange of views on a broad spectrum of topics, including macroeconomic policy, the 100-day action plan, and a one-year plan, global economy and governance, trade and investment, services, agricultural cooperation, and high technology trade. Among the outcomes achieved by the dialogue, let me try to highlight a couple of points that may not have been sufficiently emphasized in the media. First, the efforts made by the two sides for the success of the discussion reaffirm the commitment to conduct the economic relations and manage differences through dialogue and coordination, rather than confrontation. Both sides recognize that while dialogues may not solve all problems at once, confrontation will lead nowhere. Second, the fact that two largest economies of the world have chosen to engage in constructive dialogue for mutual benefit gives the world the optimism it badly needs. Amid considerable uncertainties in the global economy, such reassurances help boost business confidence more than any specific deals. Whereas our cooperation have yielded positive outcomes, China-US relations are never free of difficulties and challenges. And we should make every effort to fend off any risk that could derail our relationship. Here I wish to point out the following. First, the One China principle. This is the political foundation of China-US relations, and this is not to be challenged under any circumstances. The three joint communiques between China and the United States have laid down the principles for handling the Taiwan issue, which the United States has the obligations to abide by. However, there have been some alarming developments recently. U.S. arms sale to Taiwan is continuing, and there are also attempts to upgrade official contact and even resume military ties between the U.S. and Taiwan. China is firmly opposed to such provocation against its sovereignty and national unity, and there is absolutely no room for negotiation on this issue. The question of Taiwan actually started with U.S. intervention in China's civil war some 70 years ago. And if 7 decades later, there are still people here in the U.S. trying to intervene in China's internal affairs and challenge the One China principle, it only proves that they are on the wrong side of history. Second, the Korean nuclear issue. China and the United States share the common goal of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, though sometimes we have differences in terms of how to achieve the goal. China stays committed to the denuclearization, peace and stability of the peninsula, and maintains that the Korean nuclear issue should be solved through dialogues. And in this context, the dual-track approach and the suspension for suspension proposal put forward by China show a realistic way out of the current impasse. And we are also open to creative and practical ideas from others, especially from the United States. And there is ongoing consultation between China and the US on this issue. We hope that all parties concerned will join the diplomatic efforts and work towards the same direction. At the same time, we are against the US decision to deploy the THAAD system, which poses serious threats to China's strategic security. We also object to the so-called secondary sanctions imposed by the US on Chinese entities and individuals according to US domestic laws. Such actions are unacceptable. They have seriously impaired China-US cooperation on the Korean nuclear issue and give rise to more questions about the real intentions of the United States. Third, situation in the South China Sea. The essence of the issue is disputes over territorial sovereignty and maritime jurisdiction among some regional countries, not strategic rivalry between China and the United States. Such disputes should be addressed by countries directly concerned through consultations. And that is exactly what China and other countries concerned are doing right now. If the US truly takes no side on territorial disputes, as it claims, it should refrain from escalating the tensions and support the consultations among the countries concerned. As for the concept of freedom of navigation, it has been distorted and abused. The fact is that the US freedom of navigation operations were originally designed as a countermeasure against the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Such operations in South China Sea violate China's rights, fan up tensions in the region, and run counter to the letter and spirit of the Convention. If the US truly cares about the Convention and the freedom of navigation, it should undertake the obligations of the Convention as a contracting party and work with us to improve international maritime order, take effective measures to counter piracy and terrorism on the high seas, rather than taking provocative military and political actions in other people's waters. Having said all this, I would like to reiterate that the mutual needs and common interests between China and the United States far outweigh our differences. The relationship has grown stronger and more resilient over the decades, not because it is free of difficulties, but because we have always kept the big picture in mind, seized the opportunities to expand our cooperation, and manage our differences in a constructive manner. President Xi Jinping said at the Mar-a-Lago summit that there are 1,000 reasons for us to make the China-US relations work, but not a single reason to break it. And cooperation is the only right choice for China and the United States. Going forward, I hope that our two great countries will continue to demonstrate the wisdom, courage, and good faith, and work for further progress of China-US relations on the right track of win-win cooperation. And thank you very much. We have questions here? Okay.
Yeah, for your imparting your wisdom with us today. So we still have like 10 minutes, and Ambassador has kindly agreed to take a few questions. the gentleman there.
Thank you. My name is Bo Xu from Voice of America. I have two questions for Mr. Ambassador. One is that the United States and China held economic and trade dialogue last week in Washington, D.C., which couldn't be seen as a successful one. The indication of that is President Trump even didn't meet the Chinese delegation head, Vice Premier Wang Yang. And what do you think about it? And what is the major issue between United States and China in economic and trade area? This is the first one. Second one is that you said that the United States and China should avoid the hot war, the Cold War, not to mention hot war. My question is, can and how an emerging power like China and established power like the United States avoid the so-called hillside trap, which is unavoidable conflict between the emerging power and the established power? Thank you very much.
Well, I think this is a conference hosted by the Institute for China-American Relations, China-American Studies. So this is not my press conference. I have to make this clear at the very beginning. So we should give more time to the participants of the Congress. But let me try to give a very brief answer to your question. First of all, the comprehensive economic dialogue. The first round of the dialogue was held here last week in Washington, D.C., and it was a very fruitful one. We had extensive discussions on a wide range of issues and reached quite some outcomes. We have a press release after the dialogue listing all the outcomes there. Maybe you could have a closer look at that. As for the arrangement of the whole dialogue, their meetings, their discussion, and all this, the social events, the speeches, all this was arranged between the two sides beforehand. So everything went as planned. As I said just now, the most important outcome is that our two economies, the two biggest economies of the world, have agreed that we should have consultation and discussions about our cooperation as well as about our differences. I think this is a very constructive approach, and I'm sure it will continue. Now the working level people are still working on the one-year plan to give more substance to this action plan. I'm sure on the basis of a successful 100-day plan, we'll have an equally successful, if not more successful, one-year plan, and our economic relation will continue to move forward. About the relation between China and the United States, between a so-called rising power and the established power. There's a good book written by a Harvard professor, Professor Graham Allison. I had a good discussion with him in May. He studied all the historical cases where a rising power encountered an established power. And according to his analysis, there have been 16 such cases, historically speaking. And out of the 16, 12 ended in war and conflicts. And the rest, 4 of them, were more peaceful transition. But I would suggest China and US relations should not fall to either category. Because war and conflict certainly should not be our choice. But even transfer of a global dominance from one power to another should not be a good choice. As I said in the speech, our mission is to build a new type of international relation that make all of us equal partners, that will be based on shared interests and common future. Hopefully, China and the US can do this. Thank you.
A question, Ambassador. My name is Gordon Holden. I run the China Institute at the University of Alberta. My question is really on the trade relationship. Now easily the largest trading relationship on earth, but one of which it seems the American side is very uncomfortable with the size of the deficit in that relationship, the largest part of the US trading deficit. How do you believe that this issue can be addressed, which will preserve your access to the US market and yet perhaps deal with some of these American concerns about the imbalance? Ambassador?
Well, I think the real picture of bilateral trade between China and the United States is more complicated than it might look. First of all, trade between our two countries are not exactly bilateral trade. Many of the products China sells to the US or US sells to China have components made in other countries. For instance, iPhones. We assemble a lot of iPhones in China, but we import most of the key components or the chips and so on from other countries. So if we look at the value chain very closely, you could see you cannot say this is a product of a single country, 100%. Most of the time, it's not the case. So it's difficult to calculate the real surplus or deficit between any two particular countries. Number two, China does have surplus in trade in goods, but we have large deficit in trade in services with the United States. So if you look at the whole picture, it's more balanced. And also, last but may not be the least, we have a huge number of Chinese tourists have impressive purchasing power when they travel to the United States. And the growing number of Chinese students that are paying their tuition here, they have life expenses here. So if we look at the whole picture, this so complex and growing relations between our two countries and the two peoples, maybe we could have a better understanding of what trade is about and whether we have a surplus or deficit. But still, we want to have a more balanced trade. We don't want to accumulate trade surplus because too much of it would also be a burden for China itself. So we want to have a more balanced trade. We want to import more from the United States. We are buying a lot of soybeans. We are buying a lot of planes, of course. And we now have American beefs again. But we want to buy more. For instance, we are looking at, the two countries are looking at the possibility of exporting American LNG to China. And this is going to be a huge amount. And also, we want to import high-tech products and technologies that are purely for civilian uses. So if the US government could lift some of the restrictions on such trade, our bilateral trade will be more balanced. Thank you.
I think we still have one last question. The lady there. You, please.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation, Ambassador. We are thinking about U.S.-China relations. I suppose we can talk about economic and political and military. So I just wonder if you can address the issues of accountability and integrity and how are we going to cooperate together? You know, Xi Jinping is talking about anti-corruption, Trump is talking about nationalism, while the President Eisenhower is talking about the dangerous of the military expansion. So I just wonder if you can really, based on Xi Jinping's idea to anti-corruption, how are you going to improve both China's and the USA? How are we going to improve the people's accountability or business or trade or whatever, instead of spying and destructive forces to destroy our Earth?
Can I remind you to identify yourself?
My name is Li Yang. I'm very concerned about the Earth and how are we going to cooperate all parties to improve the people's life rather than destroy each other. You know, we don't want them to destroy our families. We don't want to destroy our communities.
Well, you see, China and the United States are interacting with each other on so many issues, and the relations is getting more and more comprehensive and complex. But I think the key issue we have to look at is how we can develop mutual confidence, mutual trust. How could we have a better understanding of each other's strategic intentions? I think this is the key issue that sometimes trouble us. As far as China is concerned, China has no intention to challenge or replace anybody's role in the world, because China is still a developing country, you believe it or not, with such a huge population. Our challenges are first and foremost domestic. China still has to devote most of its energy to overcome its own economic and social problems. We still have a long, long way to go before we can really join the more developed countries. So China has no interest, no intention to challenge the role of the United States in the world. Of course, China is growing, China is developing, and as our economy grows, as our people going abroad, we must have the capability to protect our legitimate interests and to make sure Chinese companies, Chinese citizens going abroad will be safe. And in today's world, I think every country is making its best efforts to develop its defense capabilities, and China is no exception. So I don't think people in the US should be alarmed by the more recent development of China's defense capability and increasing role of China on the international scene. This is very much in line with China's own growth. But as China grows stronger, we'll take up more international obligations and responsibilities. We'll make greater contribution to the world in ways of contribution to UN peacekeeping operations and other kinds of international cooperation on issues like climate change, health, natural disaster prevention, and so on. So I think our two countries should really make even greater efforts to have a better and more accurate understanding of each other's strategic intention. And on that basis, we'll be able to identify more areas for cooperation and give the people of the two countries greater assurances that what we are doing will bring a better life for them and for their children. But we have to do it together. Thank you.
Ambassador, do you mind take one last question? There is a couple of hands here.
Oh, I thought the last one was the last.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Bill Jones from Executive Intelligence Review. When President Trump met with State Councilor Yang, he said that he would be prepared to participate in some of the projects along the Belt and Road. I know also that there are discussions within many of the cabinets of the Trump administration concerning the possibility of working together with the Belt and Road, although this remains still somewhat sotto voce, and as yet, nobody of any significance has really, aside from the president, made an attempt to create a liaison with the Belt and Road. But I want to ask you what your thinking is, what you're getting from the U.S. side. It seems to me that if the United States participates in the Belt and Road, this indeed could become the central item for a major power relationship, which is, concerns not only China and the United States, but the entire world. And given the needs of infrastructure here in the United States, maybe a little bit of the Belt and Road spirit wouldn't hurt in terms of developing our own economy. How do you view the situation now, the status of this issue with regard to the new administration?
I think the Belt and Road Initiative was driven by the economic and social realities of the world. It is in the common interest of all the countries concerned. So it has to be designed and developed by all the countries concerned and benefit all of them. You see, historically speaking, the Silk Road in the past did have a geographical scope. But the Belt and Road Initiative today does not have geographical limitations. It's open to participation by everybody, including, in particular, the United States. So we are pleased that the U.S. sent a senior delegation to the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing in May. We look forward to more communication between our two countries on this initiative and on the related projects. And we also look forward to greater participation by the American business in this initiative. And hopefully, both the governments and the business communities of our two countries could have closer cooperation, and both would benefit from this great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Please join me in thanking Ambassador for your time.